The restaurant was buzzing with life on that chilly Friday evening. It was one of those fancy places where the floors shone so brightly you could almost see your reflection, and the air smelled faintly of expensive perfume mixed with freshly baked bread. People dressed in their finest clothes chatted softly over candlelit tables, sipping wine from crystal glasses. Everything about the place screamed luxury except for the tension brewing in a quiet corner booth near the window. Sitting there alone was a man who looked like he owned half the city, or at least acted like it. His suit was sharp, perfectly tailored to fit his broad shoulders, and his watch gleamed under the soft lighting. He had an aura of authority, the kind that made waitstaff hesitate before approaching him. This man wasn't just rich. He was powerful, and everyone knew it. He spoke rarely, but when he did, people listened. Tonight, though, something seemed off about him. Maybe it was the way his fingers tapped impatiently against the table, or how his eyes darted around as if searching for someone to blame for whatever was bothering him. Across the room, a young woman moved gracefully between tables, balancing plates and refilling drinks without missing a beat. Her uniform, a simple black dress where the white apron was, clean but worn, evidence of long hours spent working hard to make ends meet. She carried herself with quiet dignity, her smile warm, even when she felt exhausted. Life hadn't been easy for her, but she refused to let circumstances break her spirit. Every day, she reminded herself why she was doing this, to chase a dream bigger than herself. Her name wasn't important right now, but what mattered was her determination. She juggled 2 jobs while taking night classes, hoping to become a lawyer someday. It wasn't just about personal success for her. It was about making a difference, fighting for justice, and standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. But tonight, none of that crossed her mind as she approached the man's table with a pitcher of water. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked politely, her voice steady despite feeling the weight of his intense gaze. He barely glanced at her, waving her off with a dismissive flick of his hand. "Just refill my glass," he muttered, his tone dripping with irritation. She nodded, careful not to spill a drop as she poured the sparkling water into his glass. But then disaster struck. As she leaned forward slightly, the edge of her tray caught the stem of his wineglass. Before either of them could react, the glass tipped over, sending a cascade of deep red liquid spilling onto the pristine white tablecloth and worse, all over his expensive leather shoes. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The clinking of silverware and murmurs of conversation faded into the background as the man stared down at his ruined shoes, his face turning crimson with rage. Then, without warning, he exploded. "You clumsy fool!" he roared, slamming his fist on the table. Heads turned, conversations halted, and the entire room fell silent. Even the servers froze mid-step, unsure of what would happen next. The man stood up abruptly, towering over her. His voice boomed through the space, each word cutting like a knife. "Do you have any idea how much these shoes cost? Look at them. They're ruined. Do you think I pay taxes so someone like you can destroy my things?" The woman took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to apologize, to explain that it was an accident, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she stood there, clutching the pitcher tightly, her knuckles turning white. And then came the demand no one saw coming. "Kneel down and clean my shoes now," he barked, pointing at the floor. The silence in the room grew heavier, thick with shock and disbelief. Everyone waited, holding their breath, wondering what she would do next. Would she comply, humiliated but desperate to keep her job? Or would she stand her ground, risking everything in the process? What happened next stunned everyone, including the man himself. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Every pair of eyes in the restaurant was glued to the scene unfolding at the corner table. The man's voice still echoed in the air, sharp and cutting as if it had left a mark on the walls themselves. His demand hung there like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. "Kneel down and clean my shoes now," he had said, his tone leaving no room for argument, or so he thought. For a moment it felt like the entire world had stopped spinning. The woman stood frozen, her grip tightening around the pitcher in her hands. Her mind raced, thoughts colliding. Like waves in a storm. She knew what most people would expect her to do in this situation. After all, she was just a waitress, a nobody compared to the man towering over her. He was wealthy, powerful, and used to getting his way. Kneeling might have been the easiest option, the safest choice, especially if she wanted to keep her job. But something inside her refused to bow, not to him, not to anyone. Her heart pounded harder with each passing second. But instead of crumbling under the pressure, she found strength rising within her. Slowly, deliberately, she straightened her posture. She took a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs and calm the storm inside her chest. Then, without hesitation, she looked him directly in the eye. It wasn't defiance written across her face, it was dignity. Quiet, uncheckable dignity. "I'm sorry about your shoes," she said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the silence like a knife. The words came out firm but polite, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "But I'm not here to kneel. I'm here to serve food and make sure you have a pleasant dining experience. If you'd like me to call someone else to assist you, I'd be happy to do that." The room seemed to collectively gasp, though no one made a sound. Even the other servers standing nearby exchanged glances, their expressions torn between admiration and disbelief. No one dared to speak back to the man like that, not even the manager, who usually bent over backward to cater to his every whim. And yet here she was, refusing to lower herself, not physically, but emotionally. The man blinked, taken aback by her response. For a split second, his anger faltered, replaced by something else entirely. Confusion? Surprise? Maybe even a flicker of respect? Whatever it was, it showed on his face before he quickly masked it with renewed irritation. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps another insult or command, but nothing came out. Instead, he clenched his jaw, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. Without waiting for him to recover, the woman turned and walked away, her steps measured and confident. She didn't run, she didn't cower. She simply moved with purpose, leaving behind a trail of stunned silence. As she disappeared into the kitchen, whispers began to ripple through the restaurant. Some patrons shook their heads in disapproval, while others nodded in quiet approval. The staff gathered around her, murmuring words of support and encouragement. "You handled that perfectly," one of the cooks said, patting her shoulder. "Don't worry, we've got your back." She managed a small smile, though her hands were still trembling slightly. "Thanks," she replied softly. I couldn't let him treat me like that." Not again. Later that night, after her shift ended, she replayed the incident over and over in her head. What had possessed her to stand up to him like that? Sure, she'd always believed in standing up for herself, but this was different. This wasn't just some rude customer, it was him. The billionaire everyone talked about, the man who could crush careers with a single phone call. Yet, despite the fear lingering in the back of her mind, she felt a strange sense of relief. For once, she hadn't let someone walk all over her. She had drawn a line, however small, and refused to cross it. Meanwhile, the man couldn't stop thinking about her either. Long after he left the restaurant, her words echoed in his ears. "I'm not here to kneel." The phrase repeated itself like a mantra, gnawing at him in ways he couldn't quite explain. At first, he tried to brush it off, telling himself she was just another entitled employee trying to play the victim card, but deep down he knew better. There had been something in her voice, something real, something raw that struck a chord within him, that night as he sat alone in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city lights. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and stared out the window. The view was breathtaking, but his mind kept drifting back to the restaurant. Why had her response bothered him so much? Was it because she had defied him? Or was it because, for the first time in years, someone had treated him like a human being, rather than a god? He hated to admit it, but part of him admired her courage. In a world where everyone kissed his feet and told him what he wanted to hear, she had dared to tell him the truth. She hadn't begged or groveled. She had simply stated her boundaries and walked away. It was infuriating and oddly refreshing all at once. Over the next few days, the incident lingered in his thoughts. He found himself replaying their interaction, analyzing every word she had said. Each time he noticed something new, the calmness in her tone, the steadiness in her gaze, the quiet confidence that radiated from her despite the circumstances. It was as if she carried an invisible shield, protecting her from the cruelty of the world. Curiosity eventually got the better of him. A week later, he returned to the same restaurant, hoping to see her again. When he arrived, he scanned the room, searching for her familiar figure. To his surprise, she was already working, moving gracefully between tables as if nothing had happened. Their eyes met briefly, and for a moment he saw a flicker of recognition in hers. But she quickly looked away, focusing on her tasks with unwavering professionalism. Determined to confront her again, he requested her as his server. When she approached his table, her expression remained neutral, betraying no hint of emotion. "Can I get you anything?" she asked politely, her voice clipped but courteous. "I wanted to talk to you," he said, surprising even himself with the softness in his tone. "About what?" She replied, raising an eyebrow. "About last week," he admitted. You surprised me." She paused, studying him carefully. And he hesitated, unsure of how to put his feelings into words. Finally, he settled on simplicity. "I respect what you did. Not many people would have stood up to me like that." For the first time since their encounter, a genuine smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "Respect is earned," she said, quietly, not demanded. Her words hit him like a punch to the gut, forcing him to reflect on his own behavior. For years, he had expected obedience from everyone around him, never stopping to consider whether he deserved it. Now, faced with someone who refused to bow to his will, he realized how hollow his power truly was. Respect couldn't be bought, or forced. It had to be given freely. As the evening wore on, their conversation continued, tentative at first, but gradually growing more natural. They talked about everything and nothing, finding common ground in unexpected places. By the end of the night, neither of them was the same person they had been when they walked in. Something had shifted between them, subtle but undeniable. The days that followed their unexpected conversation were strange for both of them. For her, life went on as usual: early mornings spent rushing to class, late nights studying under the dim light of her desk lamp, and long shifts at the restaurant, where she served customers with the same quiet determination she always had. But something had changed inside her. That brief exchange with the man who had once demanded she kneel stayed with her, replaying in her mind like a song she couldn't quite shake. At first, she tried to brush it off. What did it matter if he had shown up again and said he respected her? It wasn't going to change her reality. She still had bills to pay, dreams to chase, and obstacles to overcome. Yet there was no denying that his words had planted a seed of curiosity in her. Why had he come back? What did he want from her? And more importantly, why did she care? For him, things weren't so simple. His world had been turned upside down by a single moment, a moment half his age, working a job most people would overlook, had stood taller than anyone else ever had in his presence. He found himself thinking about her constantly, not just because of what she had said, but because of how she made him feel: vulnerable, human, flawed. He had built his empire on fear and control, surrounding himself with people who either feared him or worshipped him, or both. But this woman didn't fit into either category. She saw him for what he was: a man. Not a billionaire, not a titan of industry, not someone to be bowed down to, just a man. And for reasons he couldn't fully understand, that realization unsettled him. So he kept coming back to the restaurant, always requesting her as his server. At first their interactions were awkward. She remained polite but distant, clearly unsure of how to handle his sudden interest in her. He, on the other hand, struggled to find the right words to say. How do you apologize to someone you've wronged without sounding insincere? How do you bridge the gap between two worlds that seem impossibly far apart? But over time, something shifted. Their conversations became less formal, more natural. One evening, as she cleared his table, he asked her about school. "You're studying law, right?" he said, surprising her with his casual tone. She nodded, glancing at him briefly before continuing her task. Yeah, I'm taking night classes. That's impressive, he said, leaning back in his chair. Why law? She hesitated, caught off guard by the question. Most people didn't ask about her dreams, they only cared about what she could do for them in the moment. But his curiosity seemed genuine, so she decided to answer honestly. I guess I've always wanted to fight for people who don't have a voice. Growing up, I saw a lot of unfairness, and I hated feeling powerless. Law gives me a way to make a difference. Her response struck a chord within him. He thought about all the times he'd used his power to intimidate or manipulate others, never stopping to consider how it felt to be on the receiving end. That's admirable, he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. Not many people would choose such a difficult path. It's not easy, she admitted, allowing herself a small smile. But nothing worth doing ever is. Their talks grew deeper after that. He began opening up to her in ways he never had with anyone else. He told her about his childhood, how he had grown up poor, struggling to survive in a world that didn't care about people like him. He shared stories of his early days in business, working tirelessly to build something out of nothing. And he confessed how success had changed him, making him colder and more detached from the very people he had once fought alongside. Listening to him, she realized there was more to him than the arrogant, entitled man she had met that fateful night. Beneath the polished exterior was someone searching for meaning, someone trying to reconnect with the values he had lost along the way. It didn't excuse his behavior, but it helped her understand him better. One evening, as they sat talking, during a rare lull in the restaurant, he surprised her with an offer. Let me help you, he said suddenly, his voice firm but gentle. Help me with what? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Your education, he replied. Law school isn't cheap, and I can see how hard you're working to get by. Let me fund your tuition. Consider it an investment. Her jaw dropped, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. The idea of accepting money from him felt wrong, almost like betraying her principles. I appreciate the offer, she said finally, shaking her head, but I can't take charity. It's not charity, he insisted. Think of it as paying it forward. You inspire me to be better, to do better. Let me give you the tools to succeed. She studied him carefully, searching his face for any hint of mockery or manipulation. All she saw was sincerity. Still, she hesitated. Accepting his help meant trusting him, and trust wasn't something she gave easily not to someone like him. I'll think about it, she said eventually, her voice soft but resolute. But if I accept, it won't be a gift. I'll pay. You back every penny, he smiled, nodding in agreement. Fair enough. As the weeks turned into months, their bond deepened. They weren't friends exactly, at least, not yet, but they had formed a connection neither of them had anticipated. For her, he became a reminder that even the hardest hearts could soften with understanding. For him, she was proof that courage and kindness could exist in the same person. Even in a world that often rewarded cruelty, their relationship wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when old habits resurfaced, when his impatience clashed with her steadfastness. But each disagreement brought them closer, teaching them to listen and learn from one another. Slowly but surely, they began to change. Not just themselves, but the way they viewed the world around them. For him, the transformation was profound. He started using his influence differently, reaching out to communities he had ignored for years. He funded scholarships, supported small businesses, and advocated for policies aimed at reducing inequality. It wasn't about redemption, it was about responsibility. He had spent decades accumulating wealth. Now he wanted to use it to create opportunities for others. For her, the journey was equally transformative. With his financial support, she was able to focus more on her studies, excelling in ways she hadn't thought possible. But more importantly, she gained a mentor, a flawed, complicated, yet deeply human ally who believed in her potential. Together, they proved that growth often begins with discomfort, that bridges can be built even across the widest divides, and though their story was far from over, one thing was certain: neither of them would ever forget the night she refused to kneel. It was the moment that changed everything, the moment that reminded them both of the power of standing tall, no matter the odds. The months passed quickly, and their relationship continued to evolve in ways neither of them had anticipated. What had started as a tense confrontation had blossomed into something deeper, an unlikely partnership built on mutual respect and shared growth. For her, the man who had once demanded she kneel became someone she could trust, someone who genuinely wanted to see her succeed. And for him, she became more than just a waitress or a symbol of resistance. She became a mirror reflecting the person he used to be and the person he desperately wanted to become. With his financial support, she threw herself into her studies with renewed determination. The weight of juggling 2 jobs while attending night classes had been suffocating, but now she could focus entirely on her education. She spent hours poring over textbooks, writing essays, and preparing for exams, determined not to waste the opportunity he had given her. Still, she never lost sight of why she was doing this: to fight for justice, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, and to prove that no obstacle was insurmountable if you refused to give up. Her progress didn't go unnoticed. Professors praised her sharp mind and unwavering work ethic. Classmates admired her ability to balance compassion with conviction, and even the staff at the restaurant marveled at how far she'd come. But despite all the praise, she remained humble, always remembering where she came from and the struggles that had shaped her. For him, watching her grow was both inspiring and humbling. He attended some of her school events when he could, sitting quietly in the back of lecture halls or auditoriums, listening intently as she debated legal principles or presented case studies. These moments filled him with pride, though he rarely showed it outwardly. Instead, he offered quiet encouragement, asking thoughtful questions after her presentations or sending brief messages of support when she aced an exam, but their bond wasn't without its challenges. They came from vastly different worlds, and sometimes those differences created friction. There were evenings when they argued passionately about topics ranging from wealth inequality to systemic racism. She challenged him to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege and power, while he pushed her to think critically about the complexities of change. Their debates weren't always easy, but they were honest, and through them, they both grew. One evening, after a particularly heated discussion about corporate responsibility, she looked at him and said, "You know, I don't expect you to fix everything overnight, but what matters is that you're trying. That's more than most people in your position would do." Her words hit him hard, forcing him to reflect on his journey. He realized that while he couldn't erase the mistakes of his past, he could shape a better future not just for himself, but for others. This realization fueled his efforts to use his influence for good. He launched initiatives aimed at closing economic gaps, partnering with community organizations to provide job training, affordable housing, and educational resources. He also began speaking publicly about the importance of accountability, urging other wealthy individuals to examine their roles in perpetuating inequality. As his reputation shifted from ruthless billionaire to compassionate advocate, critics emerged. Some accused him of performing woke capitalism, claiming his actions were nothing more than a PR stunt. Others dismissed him outright, unwilling to believe that someone like him could truly change. But he didn't let the negativity deter him. If anything, it strengthened his resolve. He knew real change wouldn't happen overnight, and he was willing to face criticism if it meant making a difference. Meanwhile, she continued to inspire everyone around her, including him. Her resilience reminded him of his own early days, when he had clawed his way out of poverty with nothing but grit and determination. But unlike him, she hadn't let success or the lack of it harden her heart. She carried herself with grace and empathy, qualities he admired deeply. Over time, he found himself seeking her advice not just on personal matters but on business decisions as well. Her perspective was refreshingly grounded, offering insights he might have otherwise overlooked. Their connection reached a new level when she invited him to speak at a student-led forum on social justice. At first he hesitated, unsure if he was the right person for such an event. "Why me?" he asked her one afternoon during a rare lull at the restaurant. "I'm not exactly the poster child for equality." "Because you're changing," she replied simply. And because your story shows that no one is beyond redemption, not even someone like you, her faith in him was overwhelming, but it also motivated him to step outside his comfort zone. When the day of the forum arrived, he stood nervously in front of a packed auditorium, surrounded by students eager to hear what he had to say. As he began speaking, his voice trembled slightly, but he soon found his rhythm. He talked about his mistakes, his regrets, and the lessons he had learned from her. He acknowledged the privileges he had enjoyed and the harm he had caused, vowing to use his platform to uplift marginalized communities. The audience listened intently, many nodding in agreement or jotting down notes. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, a sound he hadn't expected but deeply appreciated. Afterward, several students approached him, thanking him for his honesty and sharing their own stories of struggle and hope. It was a powerful reminder that vulnerability could be a source of strength, not weakness. Backstage, she greeted him with a proud smile. "You did great," she said, patting his shoulder. "See? You're capable of more than you think." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I couldn't have done it without you." Their bond deepened further as they worked together on various projects. She joined him at charity events, offering guidance on how to engage authentically with communities in need. In return, he introduced her to influential figures in the legal field, helping her build connections that would benefit her career. Their collaboration wasn't perfect, they still disagreed occasionally, but their mutual respect kept them grounded. One evening, as they sat side by side in his car after a long day of volunteering at a local shelter, she turned to him and said, "Do you ever wonder where we'd be if you hadn't yelled at me that night?" He laughed softly, glancing at her before returning his gaze to the road. "Probably nowhere near here. I doubt I'd have learned half the things I've learned from you. And I probably wouldn't have believed in myself as much," she admitted. "Sometimes I think about how close I came to letting you crush me that night. But instead I stood my ground and look where we are now." They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their thoughts. Then, almost simultaneously, they smiled, knowing that their journey was far from over. Together, they had proven that even the most unlikely alliances could spark meaningful change, one bold act at a time. Years had passed since that fateful night in the restaurant, and yet its memory lingered like an old scar, no longer painful but impossible to forget. The woman who had refused to kneel now stood tall on a stage, her cap and gown symbolizing years of hard work, sacrifice, and resilience. She wasn't just graduating. She was stepping into a future she had fought tirelessly to create. Her journey hadn't been easy, but every obstacle had only strengthened her resolve. The ceremony hall buzzed with excitement as family members snapped photos and friends cheered loudly for their loved ones. Among the crowd sat the man who had once demanded she clean his shoes. He looked out of place among the sea of proud parents and relatives, dressed in a crisp suit that made him stand out even more. But today he didn't care about appearances. His eyes were fixed on her as she walked confidently toward the podium to deliver her valedictorian speech. When she began speaking, her voice carried a quiet authority that silenced the room. "This isn't just my moment," she said, pausing to scan the audience. "It belongs to everyone who refused to give up on me even when I doubted myself." Her gaze landed briefly on him, and for a split second, their eyes met. A flicker of gratitude passed between them, unspoken but deeply felt. She went on to talk about the challenges she'd faced, the long nights spent studying while working double shifts, the moments of doubt that threatened to derail her dreams, and the people who had inspired her along the way. "There's a saying," she continued, her tone firm but kind, "that courage is not the absence of fear but the triumph over it. Standing here today, I know how true that is. Every time I chose to keep going, no matter how hard things got, I proved to myself that I am stronger than my circumstances." Her words resonated with everyone in the room, but none more so than the man sitting near the front. He listened intently, reflecting on how much she had changed him. When they first met, he had been blind to the struggles of others, consumed by his own success. Now, thanks to her, he saw the world differently. She had taught him that real power lies not in domination but in lifting others up. After the ceremony, they met outside under the warm glow of the setting sun. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, and laughter echoed around them as graduates hugged their families. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, taking in the significance of the day. "Congratulations," he said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, filled with genuine admiration. "You've earned this." "Thank you," she replied, smiling warmly. "I couldn't have done it without your support." He shook his head, dismissing her gratitude. "Don't thank me. You're the one who did all the heavy lifting. I just helped clear the path." "That's more than most people would do," she countered, her tone serious but kind. "And it means everything to me." They shared a brief hug before parting ways, each returning to their respective lives. But the impact they had on each other remained a testament to the transformative power of accountability and understanding. In the years that followed, she fulfilled her dream of becoming a lawyer, dedicating her career to fighting for justice. She founded a nonprofit organization aimed at providing legal aid to marginalized communities, ensuring that no one would have to face the system alone. Her work earned widespread recognition, inspiring countless others to follow in her footsteps. Yet, despite her growing fame, she never forgot where she came from or the man who had played a pivotal role in her journey. For him, life took on new meaning. He became known not just as a billionaire, but as a philanthropist committed to creating opportunities for those less fortunate. His initiatives touched countless lives, from funding scholarships to supporting small businesses owned by people of color. Critics still questioned his motives, but he paid them little mind. What mattered most was the difference he was making, and the person who had shown him the way. Their paths crossed occasionally at charity galas, community events, or quiet dinners where they caught up on life. Though their relationship remained complex, a mix of gratitude, mutual respect, and occasional disagreements, it served as a reminder that growth often stems from discomfort. They weren't perfect, and neither was their alliance, but together, they proved that even the most unlikely connections could spark lasting change. One evening, years later, they found themselves sitting side by side on a park bench, watching children play in the fading light. The conversation turned reflective, as it often did when they were alone. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "The one where you yelled at me?" He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Every day. It's funny, you probably don't realize this, but you saved me that night. You made me see who I really was and who I wanted to be." She smiled, leaning back against the bench. "Funny how life works, isn't it? One moment can change everything." They sat there for a while longer, letting the peacefulness of the evening wash over them. Neither needed to say anything more. They both knew what the other was thinking. Their story wasn't just about redemption or transformation, it was about humanity. About two people from different worlds finding common ground and using it to build something greater than themselves. As the stars began to twinkle above, she glanced at him one last time. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" "We sure have," he replied, his voice tinged with pride. "And we're not done yet." With that, they rose from the bench and walked away, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they had proven that standing tall doesn't mean doing it alone, and that sometimes the smallest acts of courage can lead to the biggest changes.